Are you guys getting like just nonstop like spam phone calls now? I'm getting like 4 or 5 a day.
1866.
I've always gotten that.
Yeah,
No.
I've gotten them about 3 or 4 times this week.
Yeah,
Terrible.
this is why you just don't answer your phone. It's the best strategy, best way of screening. Just don't answer any calls unless it's like who it is, and even then.
For a while, I was getting calls that were pretending to be from the CRA saying that I owed them money. And it was so obviously a scam. It was like someone from India and they had like a thick Indian accent. So like they call and I'd answer. I kind of mess with them like, oh, hi, can I speak with someone in French, please? And then they just like hang up.
I'm going to use that one. That is the best response ever. During COVID, I had a CRA call, but because they were all working from home, it was like just someone calling from their cell phone in Newfoundland. And it was legitimate, but it was like the weird, like the sketchiest thing, just because it like wasn't like there was nothing official about it. It was just some random like phone call from someone personally.
Yeah, it's like, do you guys know that there's like scams like every day coming out? People pretending to be CRA. Like you should do something to make yourself seem like more authentic and official or something.
Yeah, whenever I get calls from the US, it's and they claim to be a Canadian government official, I'm just well, I don't have any tricks like you do, Candice, about how to play with them. I just wonder why it's so out of control. I've heard some theories about it, but we'll save that for a different show.
Well, do you know why? Because I listened to a podcast once where basically they were getting all these scam calls. And so the guy played along and then he ended up doing investigative work where he flew to India and like went to the town where they were doing this and like tried to take down like the whole empire. And so I listened to that podcast series. It was like, this was like probably 8 years ago now. And so then whatever he was doing, I like use those tricks to try to like find out who it was that was doing it. But yeah, maybe we should do some True North investigation into the fake CRA agents.
Harrison, we're sending you to Mumbai.
All right, guys, let's get this started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Off the Record. Thank you so much for joining us today. So this is a show where we just talk about our favorite interesting stories of the week, not really newsy per se, but we have a little bit of a more relaxed conversation about it. So I'm joined by Andrew Lawton, who is the host of The Andrew Lawton Show and the senior editor here at True North, and also joined by Harrison Faulkner, who is the host of Ratioed and also a reporter at True North. So thank you for joining me both. So
always happy to be on.
Yeah, so
I never know whether to respond in that moment. Sometimes you just plan to go right through. Anyway, I'm here.
Well, if you had something to say, you could jump in and say it at that moment. But then if you don't, then we'll just carry on, keep calm and carry on. So let's talk about this CBC story. So Justin Trudeau was out in Alberta this week, and we were told that he was going to give us some kind of announcement. He really didn't. He was just kind of there to talk about how great the carbon tax is and how great his dental plan is or his pharmacare plan. Like he didn't really have anything. The main story for me was that he would not let Rachel Emmanuel into his press conference, which is just rude and annoying. And you forget that Justin Trudeau is a tyrant, right? Like you see him failing in the polls, you see him making silly, embarrassing things, saying silly, embarrassing things online all the time. You think that maybe he's going to like soften up and try to be more like reconciliatory, but then as soon as he sees a True North reporter or a Daily Signal reporter, Counter Signal reporter, he just goes right back to like tyrant mode where he gets the police to push them out. Anyway, luckily he has the CBC there to defend him. So we had this article that we saw. The real problem with the carbon tax, guys, is not that it's a bad policy. It's not that it's making life so unaffordable. It's not that they're raising the price at the worst time when Canadians are suffering from inflation, which in part was caused by the carbon tax. The real problem, according to the CBC, is just that they're not communicating it properly. They just need to figure out a different way to communicate it. Andrew, what are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, literally, this is liberal communications. This is liberal spin, because a couple of months ago, you may recall, maybe it was about 6 weeks ago, the Liberals set out on this grand Canadian effort to rebrand the carbon tax, because the Liberals decided to take the view that the carbon tax was just a messaging problem. It was a communications problem, which is really insulting to Canadians, because what they're saying is that, no, you're just too dumb to understand the policy, so we're going to really explain it to you, and then then once you understand it, then you'll like it. It's like, basically the Liberals are just saying that there's no way Canadians could possibly be against them unless they just don't know enough information. Like I try applying that to dating. If someone is not interested in you, no, you don't know me yet. You don't know me. It's just not going to work. So the reality is Aaron Wary's piece in CBC is literally taking that approach from the Liberals, that this is just a messaging problem, not that Canadians cannot afford a carbon tax, cannot afford the increases to the carbon tax, and do not want to pay for something that has at best a dubious relationship with the environmental objectives that the Liberals claim the carbon tax will solve.
I think that's absolutely right. Harrison, what are your thoughts?
Well, given that the CBC is the communications wing of the PMO, he should be taking his frustration out with his own employer, the CBC. But it's weird because in the article, Aaron Wary is basically blaming the banks for not manipulating their statements so that Canadians can clearly see what is a rebate and not. He basically says right here, while energy suppliers specify the federal carbon change on the bills they send to customers, banks are not obliged to clearly label the rebates when deposits are made to Canadians' accounts. So he's taking it out on the banks for not clearly labeling what the CBC and what the PMO want Canadians to see. The reality is, as Andrew said, this is not a communications issue. Canadians just don't want to have to pay for another tax, which they know isn't working. So it's just classic. I mean, of course, the whole carbon tax house of cards is crumbling. Provinces are now pushing back, except for I guess Yukon recently, but a lot of the provinces now are pushing back on this, and they're in panic mode. Trudeau went on an 8-minute uncontrolled rant a few days ago at this press conference trying to defend his carbon tax, which is crumbling. So it's nice to see.
Yeah, he seemed a little unhinged in that video, if I'm being critical and honest. Andrew, you cover this on your podcast that I think 7 or 8 out of the 10 premiers, everyone other than BC and perhaps Manitoba, although Manitoba is sort of half in and half out, have come out opposed to the carbon tax. It's interesting because when you see the CBC write a piece like this, it's kind of like telling you what's going through their own heads in the PMO, like the idea that really the Canadians just must not understand it. I know that the Auditor General came out with a pretty damning report saying that most Canadians are actually worse off under this new tax regime. What would you do if you were advising the Liberals?
Well, the problem is that it's kind of too late for them to save face on this without having some colossal embarrassment, because they have been so unrepentant about this. I mean, you mentioned, Harrison, Justin Trudeau's 8-minute long answer, and I don't know what's worse, that people had to hear him try to defend the carbon tax for 8 minutes, or just people had to hear him for 8 minutes. But the reality is the government has been they've just had scorn and disdain for anyone opposed to this policy. They've decided to make this really the flagship policy of their government. And imagine that, like Harper's, the policy that, I mean, I would say Harper's government was not as bold as it could have and should have been. But if you were to try to link like Harper to a particular policy outside of the recession, you'd probably say the GST reduction. Like that's probably a flagship enduring legacy policy from that government. Justin Trudeau wants to make an added tax the policy that people most closely link to him. So given that there is this revolt of the premiers now, 7 of the 10 main Canadian provincial premiers have not condemned it. Manitoba, you're right, they're like not saying if they have or haven't privately, which is weird in and of itself. You've got the premier of the Northwest Territories who's against it. But the reality is that the Liberals have boxed themselves in so much where showing weakness is not going to help them. So I'd say the only card left to play is just simply doing the right thing, which is letting Canadians have some relief. It's not going to help them politically, but it's the right thing to do.
Well, no, I think you're right. I think that Justin Trudeau sees himself as an environmentalist. That's probably the pet issue that he cares the most about, hence why he had that embarrassing groveling meeting with Greta Thunberg during one of the previous elections. You know, he's got a radical environmentalist as his environment minister, which is so unbecoming. And when governments complain that they can't get meetings with him and they can't communicate with him, he just says, like, it's your problem, not ours. He's quite proud of his environment minister. So I think you're right, Andrew. It's like a hill he wants to die on. And I think he wants to run in the next election using this as one of the wedge issues to say, like, conservatives and Pierre Poilievre don't believe in climate change. That's just like every day in the House of Commons that they're talking about this, that's all we hear, that same platitude. The conservatives don't care about climate change. We're the only ones that care about climate change. Do you think that's a good message for them to go into the election with, Harrison?
Well, I don't, because it looks as though, the premiers across the country, even liberal premiers, know that it's politically dangerous. We just heard from, I think it was Rachel Emmanuel's interview with an NDP strategist, pointing this out in Alberta, that even the NDP can't stand for a carbon tax because it's not going to work for them. We're starting to see the serious damage this is causing, not just for Canadians, but also look at the agriculture industry. Our farmers in our country are being crippled by a carbon tax. All of this carbon tax, led by Stephen Guilbeault, who, as you point out, is a radical environmentalist, this is having real impact on Canadians. And if liberal premiers aren't willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with a key legacy policy, like Andrew, you pointed out, for Justin Trudeau, then it's obviously not going to work for them. And it obviously hasn't worked out for them if you take the polls as an indicator of where this country is right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I can't imagine that, affordability being the biggest issue in the country right now. I don't know why you would want to double down on not just a tax, but like the issue is that they're raising the tax, right? April 1st, the tax goes up, so we're about to get hit even harder with this. All right, let's transition. I was trying to think of a good way to transition to this one, but I'm going to hand it over to you, Andrew, to talk about a new initiative from the Ottawa school board that's really highlighting how you can fail up in this country.
Well, yes, the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. Now, this is, just for context, the school board that has as a trustee Nilly Kaplan-Murth. So this is basically the caliber of those in charge at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. They've decided that they need to make school more inclusive. And you may think, okay, what's the big deal? Doesn't really matter. Ottawa School Board could make graduation ceremonies more inclusive by allowing those who didn't pass to participate. So no, we're not talking about racial inclusivity, sexual orientation inclusivity, gender inclusivity, grade inclusivity. And if you don't graduate, well, it would be not inclusive to not invite you to the graduation ceremony. Now, this is not just a change in language, as the article says. This is that they are now pivoting from a graduation ceremony, which is something very specific, to a commencement ceremony, which will allow students of all levels of achievement to cross the stage with their peers, even if they have not completed all the requirements to leave high school. So, look, students are going to have different levels of capability. You have students with learning disabilities. I get it. But the way you deal with that is not by just pretending that everyone's graduated. I mean, how far are we going to push this, was my question. Do we just say universities have to start being inclusive with their offers of admission and just letting anyone come, even if they didn't make it in? Universities then have to do inclusive commencement. And at a certain point, when everyone's crossing the floor to pick up their medical degree, we've just inclusive our way all the way to the end, where everyone's just being called doctor, whether or not they graduated. I'm being a little bit facetious here, but that feels like the direction we're going.
Well, it's interesting because, Andrew, you and I are millennials, and I think that was the generation where everyone would receive a trophy. It didn't matter if you won the race or not; you got the participation medal. And I think that the outcome of that is that you have a lot of pretty entitled, pretty lazy people in our generation that aren't achieving like they could. I think it's kind of changed for Gen Z, and I think the problems facing Harrison's generation are much more about sort of being scared to take a step into the real world, and the whole I need a safe space and I need a trigger warning and all this kind of stuff. So this strange Ottawa policy is kind of merging those all together. It's yeah, you don't really need to do anything. You don't really need to try. You don't really even need to show up and graduate, but you still get the diploma at the end of the day, which I don't know what you're supposed to do with that. What comes next after you kind of fake your way through high school, and then what comes next? Harrison, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know how this will play out, but I can't think of something worse than not passing high school, but then being brought up onto the stage to pretend as though you did. First of all, that's just terrible. But I think there's all of these policies are all kind of part of the same family. Take your quotas, take your DEI initiatives, all this equity stuff, all these participation trophies. It's all part of the same I think it's all part of the same family of policy, which is basically to lower standards to such a point where everybody's just told to accept that we're all capable of doing the same thing, that we shouldn't be celebrating excellence, we shouldn't be celebrating achievement and uniqueness. We need to just all pretend as though we're doing the exact same thing. It is. I think this is only the beginning, unfortunately. I think this is going to get way worse. And we're going to see this go into universities next. We're going to see this go into the workplace if we haven't already. It's a continuation of the participation trophy idea. And it's just going to get worse. Instead of the trophy, we're basically going to be forced to accept that, yeah, you might not be smart enough, for example, to be building airplanes, but we don't care. We're going to let you do that. You might not have the qualifications to be an engineer, but we don't care. We want you to be an engineer. We want to have, specific race quotas or gender quotas in the engineering field. So we're just going to let you build a bridge, see how that goes. All of this is going to have problems in the future. You can see it going that way. But I kind of view this as almost an attack on excellence in a way.
Well, there was a story years ago and it was also in Ottawa, oddly, that it was one of my favorite, like, of those Canadian stories that kind of becomes a bit of a thing. Like, they talked about it on Red Eye and Fox and Friends and all of that, and I had kind of contributed to blowing it up a bit. But it was basically where an Ottawa soccer league had said that if you win by more than 5 points, you automatically lost, because they were trying to say that it was just not fun anymore for the losing team if they got just absolutely slaughtered on the field. So the rule was if you won by more than 5, you lost. And that has stuck with me now for like 10 years because that's the same phenomenon. Exactly. It's the same culture. But the thing is, what I don't know, and you have kids, Candice, so maybe you can weigh in on this. I think kids get this in a way that adults don't. And I'll use myself as an example. So years and years ago when I've played piano almost my entire life, but I did these competitions that I think they were called Kiwanis competitions. There was one time where, I go and I play my song, and at the end of it, they're handing out the awards and they give, first place, second place, third place. And then I got something called the Award of Merit, which I had never heard of, but I got the sense that it was nonsense and that it was as though I had lost, or maybe I got like a non-existent fourth place award and something. But I knew that it was a fake award, and I felt nothing about it as a kid, but kind of annoyed because I knew that I had lost. But I don't know if I'm in the minority of that, or if kids are kind of aware that there is this game being played on them by the woke.
No, I think kids know. I think they get it. Like, as far as that Ottawa story, I never heard that story before. But when I was growing up and you're playing sports, sometimes it would stop counting, right? If you were really winning, they would stop counting. Or in baseball, sometimes they would just call the game. If your team was up by like 10 runs and you're going into the last inning, they just wouldn't play the last inning. But I can't imagine losing over that. Yeah, interesting that you mentioned that, Andrew, because my son he's the youngest in his class. He's youngest in his grade by over a year, just because he skipped himself ahead. And because of that, whenever it comes to PE and races, he's always last. And the school, maybe it's because it's a traditional school, they don't skirt around it. Like, they say, you came in last, you came in 13th out of 13 boys. And he knows his time. And he
deal with it, kid.
And he does. And he's like, I really want to practice running and getting better because I don't like finishing last. And we're like, well, you're smaller than the other boys, so that's probably likely that you will finish last, but you can try to beat your own time, kind of thing. And no, I think kids understand the inherent need for competition, and they like competition. That's what drives them, especially boys. They love being competitive, mm-hmm. And that it's part of human nature. And when you try to take it away and water it down, I think kids understand and recognize that. And to your point, Andrew, they feel like shortchanged by the fact that you're not being honest with them. Like, if you lost, you lost, and you should learn and to deal with that. And just final comment on this, I think we've seen like the peak of this, and we're starting to turn around, because I know in the US after 2020 and the George Floyd riots, a lot of elite schools started doing away with tests, like no more standardized tests to determine who gets into the school. And I think it's like the consensus is it's been a disaster. Like, they're bringing back tests. Let's just say that a lot of the students who were brought into those schools have not proven that they are at the level needed to be at that institution and graduate. And so because of that, a lot of the administrations at schools like Brown and Dartmouth are now announcing that they are going to return to grading by standardized testing and using them for part of their admission. So I think we're kind of like experimenting and trying, and hopefully that we're learning from it, and we're not gonna continue down that path. Okay, let's move on. I wanted to talk about a little online controversy that happened with conservative podcast host Ben Shapiro, who runs the Daily Wire, and he went viral online, basically for talking about something that I think is like a pretty standard conservative position that has been a longstanding conservative position. So let's play a clip of Ben Shapiro.
And let's be real about this. It's insane that we haven't raised the retirement age in the United States. It's totally crazy. Joe Biden, if that were the case, Joe Biden should not be running for president. Hey, Joe Biden is 81 years old. The retirement age in the United States at which you start to receive Social Security and you are eligible for Medicare is 65. Joe Biden has technically been eligible for Social Security and Medicare for 16 years, and he wants to continue in office until he is 86, which is 19 years past when he would be eligible for retirement. No one in the United States should be retiring at 65 years old. Frankly, I think retirement itself is a stupid idea unless you have some sort of health problem. Everybody that I know who is elderly, who has retired, is dead within 5 years. And if you talk to people who are elderly and they lose their purpose in life by losing their job and they stop working, things go to hell in a handbasket real quick. But put all of that aside, just on a fiscal level and on a logical level. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt established 65 as the retirement age, the average life expectancy in the United States was 63 years old. Today, the average life expectancy in the United States is close to 80.
So that blew up the internet. It was really kind of something. I mean, I think people were sharing that video. It had tens of millions of views. Conservatives were the ones that were sort of like, I should say right wingers online were the ones that were particularly outraged and offended by it, saying like Ben Shapiro's sort of touch. He doesn't understand working class people and how hard it is on your body to be like a bricklayer or work on a farm, and how 65 is old enough. Obviously, Ben Shapiro is thinking more of like people who are in his line of work, people who sit at a desk all day, and there is two totally different realities here. So I was thinking of the Canadian example because Stephen Harper under the Conservatives did raise retirement age to 67, and it was promptly moved back to 65 when Justin Trudeau was elected. I mean, I wrote about this a long, long time ago in my book, Generation Screwed, that came out over a decade ago now. But the idea that, demographics have shifted rapidly, the idea that you retire at 65 is a little antiquated when people are living into their 80s. What are you supposed to do for that last 2 decades of your life if you're not working? A lot of people didn't save up properly to afford that. So interesting debate, and also just interesting that it went so sideways for Ben Shapiro and he got slammed so hard for it. So Harrison, what do you make of all this?
Yeah, well, I think it's exposing one of the new shifts that we're seeing in the right, which is this sort of push, especially from younger conservatives, younger people, to look at the social safety net as a core, needed institution in the United States and in Canada, and not view it as something that traditional conservatives in the past would look at as an issue. Now, in reality, I think that without it, if it never came into Canada in the first place after the Second World War, we might be in a better position. But we have it now, and we have to live with that reality because Canadians have been paying into it for many generations with the expectation that they get what they pay into it when they retire. Now, the reality is with Ben Shapiro, if you are a lawyer or if you are a banker or you are in media and you sit behind a desk and you're not using your hands all day, well, yeah, I think that's one thing. I think you should be able to work up until the point where you literally can't. But when you're talking about blue collar work, manual labor, is it really good for society to have, people, breaking their backs when they're, 65 and older, in the manual labor industry? I think that there's a reality here that Ben Shapiro doesn't know about, which is the life that a lot of Americans and Canadians face. Should you be in the oil fields working an oil rig when you're 70? It doesn't seem like that's a good idea. And I think that's what we're seeing, right? And Candice, we talked about this earlier, that there's starting to be this look at Daily Wire as sort of an out of touch conservative organization, making they've become so successful and so big that they're starting to lose touch with their base. And I think this kind of exposes that a little bit. Obviously, we know that the social safety net debate was a big dividing factor between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley in this presidential primary. Donald Trump is a staunch supporter of the social safety net and the retirement age. And he had been attacking Nikki Haley for saying she wanted to raise the retirement age in the United States. So it's exposing a new fault line in the conservative dialogue. And I think it is exposing a new divide amongst young conservatives and older conservatives.
Yeah, and I would even say the difference between like traditional conservatives and sort of the new right, the new online right, and the mega right. Andrew, what do you make of this? Do you think we should have 2 retirement ages, one for white collar workers and one for blue collar workers?
Well, one point I should raise here, and I don't want to, I don't want to attract my own level of the Ben Shapiro controversy, but a lot of blue collar work exists because people with white collars just are too lazy to do something or just don't have the time to do it. I mean, and I'm guilty of this myself. It's like, but I'm trying to think of how I would feel if, some 95-year-old guy showed up to cut my lawn or something like that, and how a lot of other people would feel. So I do feel there's a societal aspect that is concerning and challenging if the elderly have to work. And there's a difference between having to work and wanting to work. Because I do agree that people can have great meaning and purpose from their work. And I'm an example of that. I love it. I want to do what I do until I can't anymore. And I couldn't see myself not in some form. But I also would love to just go down to part-time maybe when I'm, 107 and perhaps not do the 5 shows a week that I do now. Maybe I could go down to 4.5 or something. And I do think the blue collar, white collar distinction is an important one. But where I have kind of changed on this issue is that I do feel that people on the right generally make a big point, especially people on this call, of talking about, for women in particular, not working being a legitimate life choice, and that you should actually celebrate if you want to take a role as a mother, and that's something you choose to do. And I think that if you take that to its logical end, there are forms of purpose and meaning that are not built around labor. And if someone says, I actually want to take the last 20 years of my life and spend time with my grandkids and spend time with my friends and volunteer, I actually think that's a perfectly legitimate thing. So I don't buy this idea that retirement instantly means you go from doing something to doing nothing. I think it's about shifting priorities.
No, I think you're right. I think that where Ben kind of got into a little bit of trouble here is that he didn't properly distinguish between personal responsibilities and personal choice, right? So it's like the problem with Social Security and the US and our CPP and OAS and GAS programs in Canada is that they're not properly funded. So I don't think like any of the 3 of us realistically expect that when we retire, like when we hit that stage in our lives, whether it's at 65 or 70 or who knows, 75 at that point, that the government safety net will exist in order to protect us. Like I don't think the governments have funded these programs properly. And so it is like, it's your personal responsibility to save up and make sure that you're personally prepared for retirement. And I don't think that most Canadians and Americans are doing that right now. I doubt people in our generation are. Many of them haven't even been able to afford life milestones like buying a house, let alone, putting aside 20% of your income every month for retirement. I'll just share a personal anecdote. Someone in my family, and this shows the point about why retirement is bad. It's like, okay, so I have a family member who was a school teacher. She loved being a school teacher. That was like her whole life. Basically hit 65 and got forced out, like pushed out, so that new teaching spots could become available for younger teachers. But 65, she was still young and vibrant and wanted to do more. So what did she do? She went back in and became a university professor and started doing consulting. So she was collecting her full pension as a teacher. And then she was also collecting a full-time salary as a university professor and also consulting with other school districts. So she was making all of this money while collecting from the pool of retirement. It just, to me, looking at her situation, and I don't begrudge her, I think it's great that she was able to make all that money later in life, but it's like, our institutions are going bankrupt and we don't have all this money sitting around. And yet here we are shoveling money out the door to get people to retire who aren't ready to retire, who don't want to retire, who will not retire, who will just move on to a second or a third career. So from a financial perspective, I just don't think that the whole thing is organized properly. But, Andrew, do you have another thought on that?
Yeah, because the counterpoint to that, it's not as much an issue now because like no one wants to be a teacher now. But there was a time when and I think it was around the time that I was either in university or entering university where not that I ever wanted to be a teacher, but like everyone's being told, don't go to teachers college, just don't. There are no jobs available. You're never going to get hired. And one of the problems at the time was that younger, newer teachers couldn't even get supply teaching jobs because the supply lists were all dominated by retirees that just didn't want to leave, that just wanted to continue doing it. And that's a really tough situation, because I do believe there's kind of a moral responsibility for older generations to look out for the younger generation. And I do believe that, there is something problematic, to use the word of the left here, when you have a bunch of people that are, 70, 75, have a pension, and they just want to be, in the classroom still. And as a result, younger people, the next generation, can't get experience. So I agree that's an issue. I don't see a solution to it. I think that generally speaking, we all need to have, as a society, a bit of a bigger picture discussion about work and the meaning of work. And one of the problems now is that young people are not finding careers. A lot of young people aren't. They're finding jobs. They're finding 5, 6, 7 jobs, but they're not finding careers. And I don't know if that's a matter of the workforce and its strain, or if it's a matter of people that are a bit directionless, or a bit of both. But I think that's something that we need to talk about, because the idea of deriving that meaning from your work that's going to keep you there and not have you retiring, I don't think for most people is going to be there if you're driving for Uber Eats.
And I should just say, I think what we should be doing in this country is actually encouraging families to start looking after each other. Eventually, if this social safety net isn't going to be able to exist for even my entire lifetime, then we need to start looking at how other cultures have been able to look after their families. Like when you're taken care of by your older generations, as you get older and they get even more older, and it's your opportunity to now take care of them. Like that is how societies in the past have always worked out. That's how our country our people managed to survive before we had our social safety net. And I think that it's something we should be encouraging, not looking at it, not trying to promote individualism and this idea that you end up going off to a home, you end up getting a retirement benefit from the government. We need to start moving in a direction, I think, that recognizes that, families do play a role in this, and families are important.
Well, and your comment on individualism is exactly right. I think that there was a story this week that found that 71% of Canadians wanted to change their jobs within the calendar year. So, to your point, Andrew, you're not talking about people who have satisfied careers. You're talking about a job. And Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, that the expectation that we give to young people is that they're going to have a meaningful career. Most people don't really have a meaningful career. Most people have a job, and the job is there to pay the bills. And, the idea is that they're waiting for the day that they can retire. And I think we sell a false bill of goods, particularly to young women, telling them to pursue a career that will be the number one source of meaning in your life. When, to your point, Harrison, no, the number one source of meaning in your life will be, your experiences and your family and your community and, the things that you invest in on a personal level. Okay, let's move on to this story about the U.S. government. It looks like they might be banning TikTok, which is, we sort of saw it coming, but it surprised me how quickly it's coming. So it passed in the House, it's over to the Senate, and if it passes in the Senate, the Biden administration could go ahead and implement this very soon. Kind of a split again among the right, where a lot of right wingers were saying, no, this is a huge imposition. Governments can't step in and ban private companies. Other conservatives saying, look, it's pretty clear that TikTok is a Chinese entity here, and that this isn't a good thing for our society. Andrew, why don't you take it from here?
As the token libertarian, this is a tough one, and I'll both sides it at first, and in the process of doing this, perhaps I'll find a position to take. I think that absolutely free market, free enterprise, not banning apps is the right way to go. However, even the most sort of libertarian framework lets countries control their borders. There are import restrictions. You can have free market within the country, but have a protectionist approach to what's coming in. The internet is the challenging factor there, because you could argue that this is an import restriction in a way, is that the U.S. doesn't want to import TikTok into the United States, which isn't how we relate to international companies online. But if you're talking about the technicality of it, this is an export from China, this company. So I think there is an argument to be made if the government thinks that there is a significant security breach or security threat to people that's coming from this app. However, and this is where I go to the other side, I'm not convinced that this is the right way to do it. I think it's taking a sledgehammer to something that, like, for example, no one's talking about WeChat. WeChat, when I ran for office in 2018, everyone I talked to said, you got to get on WeChat because it's where all the Chinese Canadians talk. And you go on WeChat and then the people you know, it's like anyone involved in politics and anyone you know who's Chinese. Those are the two groups that I saw on there. And then so I got on it and I kept in touch with people because I had a lot of volunteers from the Chinese community. And then afterwards, I was reading up about it and I'm like, man, I want to get this thing off my phone because like any other Chinese company, it is essentially not offering any protection at all against state seizure of its information by China. Now, whether they were interested in my, canvassing schedule, I have no idea, but they would have had access to that. The Chinese government would have. So I think there is an argument to be made, but we would have to expand this far beyond TikTok. And I think that the problem I have here is that if we allow and normalize this type of power, it's the same type of stuff that gets Parler taken offline, that would get whatever. We can't say the MyPillow guy's name because we get a YouTube strike, but that would get the MyPillow guy's social media app off or Trump's social media app. Like that's the problem, is that I don't want this precedent to be weaponized when it has nothing to do with China.
Harrison, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have no time for TikTok or the CCP and think that anything that combines the two, I view as a dangerous app or a dangerous tool. I don't want anything to do with it. But that being said, I think that I'm quite skeptical of these pieces of legislation like this that are unanimously supported by both the Democrats and the Republicans in the U.S. that are going to significantly impact the social media space. I see that as a red flag myself. I'm curious as to what we don't know about the bill that is in the legislation. I think that there's a lot of talk that you're starting to see more about what this really could be motivated about and what this is all about. Because you wonder, like, it's not as though ByteDance, the TikTok parent company, has all of a sudden just now started to engage themselves in the app. They've been doing this since the very beginning, and TikTok has got itself all the way into the American cultural system. So why now? And what is really behind this legislation? What is it about this bill that we don't see? That I don't know, but I'm just very skeptical about this stuff, especially when it gets such heavy bipartisan support. I'm starting to see some red flags waving about this, but we'll see. That being said, I don't care about TikTok or the CCP or ByteDance. I think they should all be banned, but I don't know what this is really all about.
Yeah, I mean, I like the heavy skepticism towards, huge use of state power, but at the same time, it's like, TikTok is not a good faith actor. It's like TikTok in China is like teaching kids math, and TikTok in the United States and Canada is like teaching kids how to like mutilate their bodies and transition and just pushing like the worst kinds of social contagions. And it was interesting because if you look back at like the history of media companies in the United States, like Rupert Murdoch, I think they made him become an American citizen. He was an Australian because he wanted to buy a newspaper. And even just owning a newspaper is like, well, you have to be subject to the American jurisdictions. And here we have, these huge platforms that are far more influential than any newspaper has ever been or will ever be. And they're allowed to be run by some sketchy firm on offshores, on behalf of potentially nefarious adversaries. I don't like that. So I'm okay with it being banned, but I appreciate the libertarian streak on this issue for both of you. All right, let's move on to a sort of a lighter, funnier topic. I just thought this was hilarious. I love the internet, and the fact checks on X have become delightful, the community notes. So we had the mayor of New York, just a bit of background, there's a huge civil war happening in Haiti. Haiti is a god-awful country. It has been for a very, very long time. And, obviously our sympathies and hopes and prayers that things turn around and that people are safe and okay over there. But the country is dealing with a civil war and pretty much anarchy, gang violence, run amok. The mayor of New York made an interesting statement on social media. So we can put that up on the screen. He says, we call New York City the Port-au-Prince of America. We feel the pain of our Haitian neighbors feel as the situation grows dark. Fellas, has anyone ever heard New York City be called the Port-au-Prince of America? That was like the strangest phenomenon. Like you're the mayor of the greatest city in the world.
They call it that. He said himself they call it that. So who am I to point out my ignorance on this as being relevant? That I haven't happened to have heard this widespread nickname.
I've never heard anything of the kind. I don't know. I don't understand where this is coming from. I've never heard a single person ever call it that. Am I alone in this?
Unless they really hate New York and it's like, yeah, this is like this city is the worst. It's basically Port-au-Prince, but in the United States. I mean, maybe Eric Adams doesn't understand what's going on here and thought that, oh, that sounds great. We actually want to be like Haiti. We want to be more like the Haiti city. It's just absurd. But it is funny, at least.
Well, right, like lawlessness. Okay, sorry, Andrew. What were you trying to say? I couldn't make out what you were saying.
Eric Adams said that we call it that, so people must call it that.
Well, so this is the funny part. So the community notes jump in and slap this community note on the tweet. Not one person has ever said this before, Eric Adams. And so someone did a Google search of New York City being the Port-au-Prince of America, and then just like removed Eric Adams as a reference to find out if there's like any history of anyone ever saying it online, and there was nothing. So
that was when pot was legalized in Canada, the New York Times Canadian correspondent Catherine Porter had written in an article that people are calling it C Day for cannabis, and it was like no one had ever said it outside of that article.
I love that there's like Google Analytics, so you can actually fact check these things.
Yeah.
But just a strange moment from the mayor of New York City, and then the internet came to the rescue to make it a hilarious story. So I appreciated that. Another good news story to end the episode on. So you might recall earlier this football season, Andrew, I know you're a huge sports fan and football fan. So you can provide some sports insights on this story. But young man at the Kansas City Chiefs game. Was wearing a Kansas City Chiefs sort of outfit uniform here. You can see he's very festive, and he's wearing the Native American headdress. He's got face paint on his face, red and black, for the team, which I'm told is a fairly popular thing to do. We've always seen people wear face paint at sports games. That's just a thing that they do. Well, Deadspin, which is a sports online publication, they decided to take a run at this child. And here was a headline that they ran saying the NFL needs to speak out against the Kansas City Chiefs fan in blackface and a native headdress. So they pretended that he was in blackface, only showing half of his face, even though from the full clip, we can obviously see that he wasn't in blackface. He was just wearing face paint, red and black. The Native American headdress, it was very clear in those videos that his mom was uploading that he is Native American, and that he was part of a tribe. And the reason that he had that headdress is because of one of his ancestors who was the head of the tribe. So anyway, the Deadspin sports reporting took aim at this child, a 9-year-old boy, tried to write a hit piece on him, led to endless harassment. Anyway, the story goes on because the family of that boy decided to launch a massive lawsuit against Deadspin. And we've just learned that Deadspin has basically effectively just shut down. They've laid off their entire news staff. Everyone has been fired. They were bought up by a European startup, and the new European company just basically fired everybody. So this is what happens to bad journalism. I think, I don't want to celebrate people losing their job, but at the same time, it's like when you run journalism like this, it's completely race-based, completely designed to demonize and, destroy the life of a 9-year-old for no reason, just to stir up controversy, to make it seem like all Americans are racist or whatever the point of that story was. Bad things will happen. So this is a little bit of karmic justice. Yeah. Harrison, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's journalism, right? I think that this is just pure, rage, whatever you want to call it, hating, trying to feed the machine, trying to just manipulate algorithms and get a bunch of clicks. Like we're veering far away from journalism when we're talking about this story here. But these journalists, if we can call them that, these bloggers, they're bloodthirsty, right? They see something and they want to basically ruin the life of even a kid enjoying a game. And they know for a fact that he's actually not wearing blackface, but they don't care. They're going for blood. They want to ruin his life. They want to ruin his mother's life. And the reality is, I think, what goes around comes around. This is karma for you. They're gonna have to deal with the consequences of whatever this is, because I don't even want to call it journalism.
Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you are right about the goes around, comes around aspect. I mean, digging into the archives again, which I realize I've done now twice in this show, there 5 years ago, I don't know if you guys remember it, there was this controversy in Iowa where a guy at a sporting event had held up a sign asking Bush to give him money to buy more beer. Bush, the beer company, not George Bush. And then, so it became this viral sensation. And then the Des Moines Register in Iowa ran this like hit piece on him because he had written something, rude on Twitter when he was a teenager, this guy. So this feel-good viral story ends up becoming it. But then people dig into the reporter and find that the reporter who wrote the story had also said naughty things online, and then he got fired. And it's like no one wins when we do this. So in this particular case, the kid that was guilty of being a sports fan and nothing else comes out on top, and the hack reporter has no outlet. So again, I don't celebrate people losing their jobs in terms of the shutdown, but I think that one individual person who lost their job was probably warranted, if nothing else, just because they were bad at looking at the left side of someone's face when they want to write a story about what's on their face.
Well, it's just like basic journalism and journalistic integrity. It's like, you're writing a story, you have the screenshot that shows half of his face. You must have watched those videos. You must have known as a journalist that he wasn't wearing blackface. He was wearing half and half. And it was like, they just didn't care. Editors didn't care. Whoever looked over the story, whoever signed it. Like, I think that the fault is broader than just the one journalist. And I think that obviously it showed that this entire outlet was just not worth saving, because what they were engaging in was just so, bottom of the barrel mud throwing that no one deserves a job when you're running an outlet like that. Harrison, I'll give you the final word on this one.
Yeah, well, it's all part of the effort to try to erase these names, right, from sports teams. They want to try to erase the Kansas City Chiefs like they erased the Cleveland Indians baseball team, like they erased the Washington Redskins. None of these names were racist when they were the names. None of them are racist now. They're actually celebrating that part of American history and that warrior aspect of the people. But of course, this is all an effort to try and make the Kansas City Chiefs and their fans look racist, including a kid. They won't stop until they eventually succeed in what their plan is, which is to erase these important cultural symbols of the United States. And no matter what we say about it, these football teams are cultural symbols of the U.S. and so are the Kansas City Chiefs. So that's what they're going for. They want to try and, they have them in their targets. They're going to try to take them out, and they're not going to stop. This is just, the reality is I don't think anyone is going to learn from this, right? There's going to be some Deadspin, knockoff blog, then the next person is going to write a similar article next year. And the same cycle is going to keep happening because they can't see what's going on. They're solely focused on trying to take out these teams, trying to paint half the country as racist. And these are the consequences.
Yeah, it's like the epitome of the two things that the left hates the most, right? It's like masculinity and the celebration of masculine strength. And then second, patriotism and the celebration of community and America. So I think you're totally right with that one, Harrison. All right, everybody, let's call it a day. Let's have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to Off the Record. And remember, everything you just heard was, in fact, off the record.
I exhausted all of my sports knowledge in that 5-minute segment.
Yeah, including calling goals and soccer points, which I was going to make a point about, but I didn't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation.
Yeah.
Wait, goal? You can't call goals points?
No, they're
Why
goals.
Not?
Because they aren't points. They're just goals. That's just how it goes.
If you get a goal, does your score go up by 1 point?
But it's one goal.
It's
not a point. Well, we'll have to have this conversation. We'll have to have this debate at a later date.
So you guys can debate about sports. I really wanted to talk about Princess Kate Middleton and how she disappeared. But I didn't think you fellows would want to talk about.
Oh, I would have taken that over the sports one. No, I'm all in on the Princess of Wales drama.
Okay, what's your take? What's your?
Oh no, I'm fascinated by it. But the problem is you can't talk about the story without talking about that, like, Alec. I don't think we can use the word pegging on our show, but like the weird, like, really kinky affair allegations, which I think are relevant to it, and now are getting reported on.
See, I haven't read that deep into the story here, so this is
everyone's talking about it. Like I go to school
totally
to pick up my kids, and like all the moms are like, "What's happening with Kate Middleton? Is she alive? Is she dead? Vaccine injured? Like murdered by Prince William?"
That part I was aware of, but not what Andrew just said. I was not aware of.
So there have been for years there have been these affair allegations, and they got like and the British tabloids will just not report on them at all. And like one of them was that, like, Marchioness of Cholmondeley. Now, this is like the theory is that Kate has left William and the palace is in like a free fall over it.
Wait, they actually printed those
No, the British media didn't, but Spanish media did.
Oh my goodness.
And now even like American outlets are starting to like reference them. Everyone but Britain. But it's like when there was a big like scandal with Elton John and his husband, everyone but the British media reported on it.
Well, I guess we'll have to tune in next week on Off the Record as the content really gets a little strange.
As long as I get to say the Marchioness of Cholmondeley on the show, I'm happy.